Hi everyone, Brainerd here. Good to good to do this. This is a first live talk, so I'm excited about talking about this topic, grants, which everybody seems interested in. So let's just talk about that. But to begin with, I just want to thank you guys for being here. And if you want to comment, I'd love to know where you are right now. Are you in the States? Are you somewhere else in the world? Where are you at the moment? I'm always curious. So let's see. Good to have you guys here. What I want to jump right into is what is a grant exactly? What does that mean? And a grant is essentially a gift of money for an artist, right? It's typically no strings attached. There are foundations. There are wealthy people who essentially put aside a certain amount of money so that they can give away this money, often tax free, to artists, and that's how it starts, and then it ends up growing over time. The grant I'm talking about today, by the way, is international. So I see there are people here from Mexico, different places, and I was just asking, yeah, if you can put in the comments where you are from. I'm interested because the grant that we're going to talk about is an international grant, and again, to discuss like where does all this money come from, right? It comes from wealth that's invested. So, for example, today we're going to talk about the Pollock Krasner Grant, which is named after Jackson Pollock and his wife and partner Lee Krasner, two painters who were quite renowned, and that grant was started by their money, but that money grew over time because it was invested. And this is how almost all the grant agencies work. There's a certain amount of money that's created as an endowment, and that money grows over time. So not only do they not run out of money, they keep having more money to give away because the money keeps making more money. So, for example, the Pollock Krasner Foundation has given away over $87 million worth of grants so far to artists, and those are in amounts from like $5,000 to $30,000, and they've given grants to over artists in over 79 countries. It's an international grant. So let's talk about that because I want you guys to consider applying for this. It's free to apply to, and it's money. It's cash that you can use in any way you want. So to begin with, I want to just ask or talk about what is a grant for you, and what does that mean? What is it? What's expected of the artist? And typically there isn't expectations placed on the artist. There's a few kinds of grants which I'll talk about, but the artist is simply doing their work and they're getting money for making that work or wanting to make that work. So there's a few different types of grants that I want to discuss so that you understand the difference between the two before we get into exactly how to apply for a grant today. You can research grants in a lot of places, by the way. No matter where you are in the world, you can research them online, but you can also go to your local library. And in a way, a local library is really cool because you'll talk to a librarian. There'll be someone there who can personally help you. And if you say to them, I want grants as an artist, and that's really important to say that you want grants as an individual artist because there are grants for organizations, but those aren't the ones you want to apply for. You want to apply for grants that are for artists. And if you go to your local library anywhere in the world, they'll basically hold your hand and walk you through the process of where to find those grants. But today I want to jump right into the Pollock Krasner Grant and the different types of grants that are out there that you could apply for. So there's basically three types of grants out there. And the three types of grants are merit-based grants, need-based grants, and project-based grants. And I'm talking about individual grants because you're all individuals. You're not applying for a nonprofit organization. And in that realm, there's two types of grants. There's individual grants, that's the ones we're talking about today that go directly to the artist. And then there's organizational grants, and those are the grants that go to foundations, that are nonprofit, that are serving often some educational purpose. Today we're only talking about individual grants. And so that's really important. The three I described, or that I'm going to describe, merit-based, need-based, and project-based, are the three types. So I want to talk about what those mean, because it'll make a difference between how you apply to them. There's the first one I mentioned is merit-based grants, and that simply means it's about your art, right? You show them your work. You may have to give them a resume or say a little bit about it, but essentially it's about your art. Do they like your art? Does the jury like your art? And if the jury likes your art, and you're competing against other artists, of course, right? They're looking at, say, 100 applications and giving out 10 or 20 grants. So, different jurors will like your art and others will prefer a different kind of art. And so, they kind of weigh them. They give them all points in a different system so that they can choose finalists and pick one at the end. But again, that's merit-based grants, right? It's based solely on your work. The Guggenheim grant, which is a U.S.-based grant, is such a grant. It's merit-based. It's simply about your work. It's not about the project that you're about to do, and it's not about how much you need the grant. So that's the first grant that I want to just mention, the first type, merit-based. Then there's need-based grants, and that's the one we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Pollock Krasner, which is need-based, which means it's about your need for the grant. Maybe you have expenses that you can't meet. Maybe you have expenses for supplies, renting studio space, exhibitions, even attending a residency and offsetting living expenses there. That's need-based, right? What you need the money for. And we're going to talk about that today in the grant that we're discussing and that you can apply for. So the next grant is project-based grant. Project-based means it's a grant that requires a specific project. So they're asking you for, and the Awesome Foundation is one such grant. That's a $1,000 grant. They want to know what you're going to do. That's awesome. What's the project? What's the idea? And so an idea can be anything from, literally anything with that particular granting agency, from, doing some kind of maybe public sculpture, or maybe doing a workshop, or doing something that's not even art related. They're not solely art related, but they want it to have some impact in the world. So it'll be about that. But today we're talking about a need-based grant. And so let's jump right into that. What does that mean? We're talking about the Pollock Krasner Grant. And I've looked at winning applications. I work with artists on this grant as well as other grants. So what I'm speaking from and to is not only the application, which I know very well, but also winning grant applications that I've seen. So to talk about that one, the link's already put in here, and it's good to see everybody and some familiar faces here. Good to have you guys here. We're jumping into it right now. This is really literally where the money is, right? We're talking about how to get to these grants. So the Pollock Krasner Grant is the one we're talking about today. You can see it yourself at pkf.org, but you don't have to go there right now, but that's where the whole application is, pkf.org. And there's a few elements to that grant, but the first element, of course, is, are you eligible? Is this the grant for you? And I suppose there's two sides to that, right? This may or may not be like just the grant you want, but the question is, are you even eligible for this grant? So to describe the grant, which I've described a little bit before, and this is from their website, the foundation of the Pollock Krasner Foundation provides financial resources for visual artists to create new work, to acquire supplies, rent studio space, prepare for exhibits, attend a residency, and offset living expenses. Those are basically what they ask for in terms of, this is what we're giving money for you to do. And it's a great grant because they don't have a deadline. You can apply anytime. It's a rolling deadline, and it also doesn't cost anything to apply for. So what kind of artists are they looking for? And this is where, again, are you eligible? So reading from their application, their website, it's the foundation welcomes throughout the year applications from visual artists who are painters, sculptors, and artists who work on paper, including printmakers. There are no deadlines. Grants are intended for a 1-year period of time. The foundation essentially reviews expenditures relating to your professional work, and they give grants up to $50,000. The size of the grant is determined by the circumstances of the artist, right? What you need money for. The amount you've exhibited will be taken into account, and they assume that you are actively exhibiting. So there are some restrictions on it. I'm going to go into the details of how to apply for this particular grant, but the restrictions on it are this. The Pollock Krasner Foundation doesn't accept grants from commercial artists, graphic artists, video artists, performance artists, filmmakers, craft makers, or any artist, and this is really critical, whose work primarily falls into those categories. So, and they also don't have an open photography program, and they don't make grants to students or fund academic study. And they also don't pay for past debts, legal fees, or personal travel. So that's really important to know, right? Because if you're applying for, help for paying for school or personal travel or past debts, even if they love your work and what you're doing, you're not going to get the grant. So, so it's important to know what your eligibility is. And again, I just went over those criteria, but you can visit it yourself at pkf.org. And we'll talk about more grants you apply for, because I also regularly post resources for grants in a number of places, but I do it on my blog essentially. Let's see if I can put that in here. Yeah. There we go. That I don't know if you can click on that link, but that's also the link to where there's a list of not only the grant that I'm talking about today, but also the Awesome Foundation grant and many others that I'll talk about in future talks here. So we talked about eligibility right now, right? That's the first criteria here. Are you eligible for this grant? And I went over the guidelines for that. And so the next thing is, writing this grant out, and how much are you asking for? Are you asking for $50,000? Are you asking for $45,000 or $5,000 or $10,000? The average grant that they give out is between $5,000 and $30,000, and that tells you that if you just ask for $50,000, that may not give you the best chance, because what they're looking for is again need, right? What do you need this money for? And the kind of need that they are looking for, as I mentioned earlier, is very specific. To create new work is one of them. Like, you need money to buy bigger canvases or more paint. That's one of the things that they want to pay for. To acquire new supplies. Is your studio space becoming harder to rent, or you don't have a studio space and you want to rent something larger? That's something they help with, as well as preparing for exhibits. And even attending a residency if you don't have the money to do it. So so having said that, the amount you ask for is important, because it should sound real, right? It should sound like, okay, I want $12,550, and this is basically what I want the money for, as opposed to a really even amount like $20,000, $30,000, or $50,000. And I'm not saying you can't ask for those amounts, absolutely. But it should be justified somehow, because part of all grant applications is they're getting to know you, right? So in the very short writing that there is, and I'll explain how to do that writing in just a moment. In the very short writing that there is, they're getting to know you, and basically they want to know, can they trust you? And your words and what you ask for helps them understand that. It's just one component in what's going on. But that's important. So so how much money are they giving out? And how much money should you ask for? As I said earlier, this is an international grant. They've given over $87 million in grants. That's no strings attached money, just for asking, to artists in 79 countries. So we want to go through the application a little bit now, right? We want to learn about how to actually do this, because I think it's important to just to jump into this and to begin to apply today. So I talked about, are you eligible, right? And that's the first thing. And again, eligibility is about, this is a need-based grant. You can be anywhere in the world and apply for this. And eligibility is visual artists who are painters, sculptors, and artists who work on paper, including printmakers. Not photographers, not graphic artists or video artists or performance artists or filmmakers. Again, you could be doing all of those things, but they want your work to primarily be painting, sculpture, or working on paper. So after you decide that, okay, so that is me, I'm eligible. The thing is, how much do you need? And how much do you need is important, because that's partly what's going to determine, from the jury's point of view, do they believe that this artist really needs to have this grant? Does this sound reasonable? So again, make it real. Your budget can be very concise. This is all done in a cover letter, so it's prose. You're not really like filling out a form or anything like that. It's prose. It's you're writing a letter. And the letter should be, exceedingly polite. It's kind of odd, but the form, I would suggest, all the winning forms that I've seen start with, Dear Pollock Krasner Foundation, thank you so much for reviewing my application, and then you begin your writing. And at the end, you sign off with, thank you so much for reviewing my application. Like, sincerely, in your name. Not high or abbreviating too much. Those kind of niceties make it clear that you're aware of their time, right? They're going through a lot of applications, and it sets the tone immediately. It sets the tone that you're someone who's polite, who's potentially a team player, who's easy to talk with, because all of these things are important. So the first what I mentioned was the portion of this is, are you eligible, which I went through. The second is, how much do you need? And that you write in the polite letter that I was just beginning to describe. Dear Pollock Krasner Foundation, thank you for reviewing this, etc. And when you're writing that, what I would suggest is to very quickly, under a page, right, write out what you need the money for. And again, what they want to give the money for is quite specific. It's to acquire new supplies for your work. So you could say, one winning application I saw said, look, I've been working in this small way in my kitchen table, and I'd like to work larger. So I need a studio, which I share with someone else or will share with someone else, and I need more supplies. That would be a legitimate reason and something to ask for. So that's about how much you need. And again, today, for those who are just joining or those who are here, we're talking about the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant. It's a grant to individual artists almost anywhere in the world. It's an international grant, and it's up to $50,000. So after deciding you're eligible, after reading the requirements carefully, which I've gone over here, and you guys can ask questions. I'll open this up to questions in just a moment. The first part of the writing is, what are you asking for, as I've gone over? How much money and what do you need it for? And then thank you so much for reading my application. The next part is your art itself. And there's different ways of talking about it, but is the art statement. They don't call it an art statement, luckily, because those are really difficult pieces of writing to write, and they mean something different to anybody. They say, describe your work. So describing your work is much easier than writing about your work. work, right? Like, what does it mean, or what's my message, or what am I trying to do? And you could say those things too, but they just want you to describe it because they want to know a little bit about what they're seeing. They're looking at images online, of course, not original work. So sometimes it's hard to see like the texture of a painting, or knowing more about what's happening with a sculpture or other work where the image of itself doesn't tell you everything, right? If you're making some kind of sculpture and you're using different processes that are some are fabricated, some are by hand, that will help to know. If processes are done by chance or other things, that will be really helpful to know as well. So so I'd suggest you think about that, and that's an important aspect of this particular application. So there's it's simple, really, though. Again, I don't want you to get hung up on the description of the work, that it has to be philosophical somehow. Just describe what it is. This is a painting. This is on canvas. It's an image of my hometown, and I painted this using brushes and a palette knife on canvas, cotton duck canvas, something like that, right? Just really straightforward. So that's easy, right? That's relief. Art statement is easy. It's not about anything other than describing the work. Some years it's been optional. All these applications tend to change. Some years they're optional. And on that blog, I will post one as an example, but I don't have that now. Just to answer that question by Alana. So let me go through the application first, and I'll answer more of your questions. So then there's references. They'll ask for references, and references means 3 friends that can vouch for you. And again, the references are really about 2 things, and they're about kind of trust. Somebody who knows who you are, who can say, yeah, I've known so-and-so for so many years, and they've been painting or drawing or sculpting in this way. And ideally, it's someone who can write. It could be a former teacher. It could be a fellow artist, someone that in the art world. Ideally, again, someone who knows you. They're essentially creating a character reference. They're helping them to trust you, really, right? They're helping the jury to trust you. They know this person. So that's essentially what's happening there, and is important to know about in terms of what to do next, because the references are important to the extent that they don't have to be famous people or known people, but again, character references. They'll help the jury to trust you. And you don't need those letters now. When you fill out the application, you can ask 3 friends, 3 artists, some people that you've known, ideally maybe people who have received grants before, and you can say to them, would you mind if I put your name down as a reference? Which means, the reference is someone who, and you explain it to them, will vouch for who I am and that I'm an artist if you're asked. Because at some point, as your application moves along through the committee, they'll ask. They'll write to your references and ask them. So that's the whole idea with references, and you can ask more questions. I'm going to get to all of yours in just a moment, because with as one person asked here, I'll get to some of them now since they're right on this. Should you describe the main messages of the artwork? You don't have to describe the main messages of the artwork, but you could if that's really important and it's not obvious through seeing the work. Absolutely. So we've talked about a few aspects of the application: eligibility, reading requirements, writing the cover letter about how much you need, and then as you fill out the application, references will be one of the things that are asked for, and those are the main parts. except that's not the art, right? You have to upload your art at some point. And this is really, really critical because you're uploading images of your art, right? So how were those images taken and who took them? You know, we're all used to taking images of our art and posting them on Instagram or other places. But for the sake of a grant, the images have to be really good images. And by really good images, I mean the lighting has to be perfect on them. Let's say we're talking about a canvas. The lighting has to be great. It has to be as though it was photographed by a professional who professionally photographs, you know, artwork for a living. So that means that the painting, the drawing, the sculpture has to be square in the frame. You know, this may be obvious to some of you, but it's not obvious to everyone. The image has to look beautiful in terms of how it's presented. There can't be clutter in the background if it's a sculpture. If it's a painting, it has to be on a neutral background. And again, it has to be square in the frame, not tilted or kind of warped like that. That's really important. And also, it has to be even lighting and really good color. Because if you're using your own lights or natural light, it'll tend to be, you know, warmer or cooler in some areas, brighter, darker in other areas. That's all like deadly to an application because it makes the work look amateurish. It makes the work look not nearly as good as it is. A gorgeous painting, poorly photographed, looks, you know, way below what it should look like. It looks worse than it is. So that's a really important mistake not to make. If you can't photograph them well, have someone do it for you. If you can photograph them pretty good but not perfectly, hopefully you know how to use Photoshop or another program that's as robust as Photoshop, so you can straighten it in the frame, correct all the colors, make all the lighting look even. And that's not an easy process. Sometimes you can be messing with your painting for a while and the lighting is even, but then you realize, you know, it's not quite looking like your art anymore. The colors are off. So, you know, all of that's really important to kind of address in creating really good images of your work. If your work is on paper, scanning is a possibility instead of photographing. That has its limits as well, but that's another possibility there for sure. So, okay, I've gone over a few things here about lighting the work, about filling out the application, and also remember that the Pollock Krasner Foundation does not require a fee. This is free to apply for. This is an international grant, and there's no deadline. So the sooner you apply, the better. And they have a tremendous amount of money. One of the things that happened in the pandemic, and I don't know the exact financial reasons for this, but all of these granting organizations, like the Guggenheim, like Pollock Krasner, had their money in an endowment, right? It's sitting there in an investment account to generate more money. Well, it seems that in the pandemic, they made much more money. So most grant organizations seem to have about twice as much to give out. And so the Guggenheim grant after the pandemic went up tremendously. It was a $40,000 grant. Many people were getting upwards of $70,000, and granting agency that previously, you know, gave out $1 million with every cycle are giving out $2 million. So there's money out there, you know, a lot of it. And again, as I said, the Pollock Krasner gave out $79 million so far in grants to artists in 79 countries. So for those of you who just joined, you know, some of this can be read in the recording afterwards. I want to put in here the link to where I post grants, and the Pollock Krasner grant is also in there. But now I want to answer all your questions if you have any. So Noella, are they less inclined to give a grant to an older artist? No, they're not. That's a really, really good question, right? If you're an older artist, are they not so inclined because, It's always the younger, newer artists that you seem to hear about. And in this grant and in many grants, the answer is absolutely no. Older artists, in fact, are preferred. Although they wouldn't call it older artists, they'd say mature careers. Because younger artists are beginning, right? No matter where they are in their career. If that's how they're defined, younger artists or emerging artists, then they're just beginning to build some kind of rigor to their career. And so that's the beginning of it, right? And so what I would suggest is, in terms of that, don't think that because you're an older artist you're not eligible for this grant, because in fact you are eligible for this grant. And older artists who have mature careers are impressive to grant organizations because it shows consistency, it shows evolution, it shows rigor. It's rigor in your practice, in the way you approach work. So absolutely. What determines if art is deemed commercial? Deborah's asking, and she's asking that because one of the things that they don't give money to is commercial artists, graphic artists. That would mean commercial art in terms of anything from logos to work for hire that has a commercial application of some kind in publications, doing graphics for publications, drawings for publications, illustrations for publications. That would be considered commercial artist. Not just because you're in a gallery and selling work. That a commercial gallery, that is not a commercial artist. That's an artist who's selling work, which is fine. Carol, is the grant eligible for people outside the U.S.? Absolutely. The Pollock Krasner Grant is eligible for the international community. As I said earlier, they've given out a total of $87 million. I think I reversed those numbers. $87 million to 79 countries. If awarded, Clyde's asking, do you recognize the foundation during the exhibition? You don't have to. They ask that you do, because of course they want to be, recognized in some ways, but there isn't a criteria. There used to be more criteria from grants, where there was had to be certain kinds of recognition, but now there's less and less of that, because what would actually happen is artists would get the grants, they'd maybe spend it on something other than what was intended, and then they were running away from the grant organization, who was trying to get a kind of documentation from them. So that's been dropped by almost all grant organizations, because they don't want artists to feel stressed by this. They're giving them the grant because they want the artist to use the grant. And in most cases, they aren't requiring the artist to recognize the foundation, but sometimes they do. And I'm answering questions here, so if anybody has questions about anything, just let me know, and I'll answer it. What is good art for you? Well, for me personally, it's whatever I like. I see a lot of shows all over the place. I recently went to the Outsider Art Show, and that was a fair, and I really enjoyed that. But I've seen a lot of great shows. Every Woman Biennial right now has a lot of great art in it. There's all kinds of great art out there. Hard for me to be really concise about what art I like. There's so much out there, and I'm always open to looking at new art. I'm from the U.S. and have received a 1099 form for taxes. No, that hasn't changed as far as I know. Where to apply? It's pkf.org. I also did put in my link here for my grant list, which has lots of grants on it, which I'll put in again right there. But you apply at pkf.org, and Delia's also putting in that. Thank you, Delia. So will having less visibility in art circles hurt your chance of credibility? Really good question. having less visibility in the art circles. So in a way that's kind of broad, right? Like what does that mean? Art circles. What are those art circles? Is that exhibits? Is that specific groups? Specific universities? Essentially, the answer to that is on one level, no, right? It's not about that kind of visibility. However, this grant does want to see that you have been exhibiting. So if you haven't been exhibiting at all, or very rarely, that will be problematic with this grant. And if I don't in answering some of these questions, don't hesitate to ask again, because I'm going through these in the order that I'm in right now. But post yours in again here if I didn't answer it. So William said, how about a not well-known 67-year-old artist that's been painting full-time for 13 years? Well, William, I applaud you. How about that? That's great. In terms of, does the grant, is the grant applicable to you? Are you eligible? Yes. If you were talking about the kind of question of ageism before, you absolutely apply. All the Guggenheim grants that I've seen win, and I work with different artists on those grants, and I've seen 7 winners so far. All of them have been women who are between the ages of early 60s to late 70s. Just as an aside. Let me see. Would a serious collector be appropriate for a reference? Nancy's asking. Hi, Nancy. Good question to ask. And this is about the references that I was talking about earlier. So a collector could be one. One thing to do that I didn't mention that's really, really important here is write to the Pollock Krasner Foundation if you have any questions at all. I think it's in their other application, but it's something like info@pkf.org. This is a general rule, but a really important one for grants. If you're not sure, write to them. They want good applications. So Nancy, you're not sure if a collector is a good reference? Ask them, right? Because the Guggenheim doesn't want collectors as references. They don't want people who have a financial interest in your work. So a gallery owner, even who's showing your work, is not who they want to reference from. Partly because finance is their interest. If you win this grant, the gallery may sell more work, the collector's work may go up in value. But again, that may not be the case for the Pollock Krasner Foundation, which is why it's really important to ask. Let's see. So, other questions. A word count on the artist biography for applying for an artist grant? Gabriel's asking. Well, this particular grant doesn't ask for a biography. I would always say keep it under 500 words. I think 250 words is good for a biography. And, Gabriel, it's a good question because word count, as kind of picky as it is so incredibly important. And the reason it's important is because everybody's busy, right? Maybe, you can't watch this whole video, or you have something else to do, or you're starting to look through this grant, but then you're working on something else or get distracted. We tend to scan emails, scan articles. So, the briefer and more concise you can be in an artist biography, I really think 250 words is plenty, to make the salient points and be impressive. The shorter is better. That will make the jury happy. Again, I've worked on a lot of grants, and I always emphasize brevity, because all the winners that I've seen who are brief won. And I think it's also just kind of polite. It's a gift to the jury, to not stress them out with a 10-page grant or a long artist statement that's like over 500 words. Can you use this grant? Oh yeah, that was a question that was asked before. To fund a traveling show. Please ask again if I haven't answered your question. To fund a traveling show for college galleries. I have to kind of interpret what you're saying there, artist Jinnam. it's not allowed. It's not a grant for students. According to their application, which I'm reading from right now, the foundation does not make grants to students or fund academic study. This may fall into that category, the way you're describing it. If it's an organizational grant for a college, then this is absolutely not it. This is an individual grant, the Pollock Krasner Award, so it wouldn't be given to a college or an organization to fund an entire group traveling show. But if I've misunderstood that, please ask again. How many artworks do we have to be eligible? Paintings with Safa? That's a good question. How many artworks do you have to have? It's not so much how many. It's how long have you been an artist, and how seriously do you take it? If you've only made 5 paintings and you started last year, this isn't the grant for you. This is a grant for artists that have been exhibiting, that have exhibits in galleries, in museums, places that are known. So I can't answer that with a definite number, because there isn't a number. You could be making large canvases that take a year to make, and you've been doing this for the last 10 years, so you only have 10 canvases, and 3 of them you don't like, so now you have 7. And that's fine. But again, it's more about the time that you've been an artist. How long have you been an artist? How seriously do you take it? And William saw videos from the Outsider Art Show. Yeah, it was great. It was great. Well, glad you guys found it thankful. Nice to see you and hear from you, Bill. Any other questions? Which one is what? I don't know what you mean. I don't remember your last question. And you're welcome. Thanks everybody. And I'll be ending soon if there's not too many more questions. If there's anybody here who's won the award, let me know. I'd like to know that too. Clyde's asking, he's exhibited in India and is new to the U.S. and hasn't exhibited here. Will that go against me? No, it won't go against you. This is an international grant. If you apply from outside the country and win, they'll give it to you from outside the country. Exhibiting in the U.S. is not about that. Sheriff, if I have artwork to frame, can that be included in the cost for the grant? Absolutely. If you have artwork to frame and there's an exhibit coming up, absolutely. That would definitely work. Deborah, that it asked me to list solo exhibitions. It will ask you, for that. I wouldn't assume you're not a good fit if you haven't had many. I would do it anyway, because there's 2 parts of the application. One where you're kind of going through it and filling in a list in their kind of drop-down menus, and then you can also upload a CV. So even though they give you kind of limited possibilities in the initial part, when you upload a CV, you can put every show you've been on in there that you think is important for sharing. Hermes, good to hear from you. Glad you feel that way. I'm a pro, but have installations that work at school. If it's entirely about this, if it's about you exhibiting your work in the school, that would work. If it's as long as it's just for you. A senior artist could be a good reference. Absolutely, Safa. Absolutely. By visibility, I mean I live far away from the city, away from action, and can't afford to attend shows or relevant events. The grant may afford me a chance to be in the heart of action. Well, that could be good. That could be helpful and a good reason to apply. You'd have to have some exhibits, outside. The exhibits don't have to be in the city, but they are interested in exhibits. Can the money be used for a self-guided residency? Fly to New York, hire a studio, create work while visiting galleries? Or do you need to mention a residency? Well, that's a good question, Alana. The foundation does a number of things. This is what they say. They provide resources for visual artists to create new work, acquire supplies, rent studio space, prepare for exhibitions, attend a residency, and offset living expenses. So you don't have to call it a self created guided residency, although you could. If you need to prepare for an exhibit and you have living expenses to offset, and those are being in New York, then yeah, it applies. You can say you're meeting people in New York. You could call it a self-guided residency. Why not? But it could also be for materials. It's not that one is better than the other. It could be a number of things. You are going to New York, and you could use a few $1,000s more to do something, but then you also need money for supplies. That's another element. And you also, are renting a studio space. So, you could have multiple reasons that you want the money for. Carol, if I have no exhibition record, am I still eligible? No, you have to have some exhibition record for this grant. How can you get more recognition? With more exhibitions. The more exhibits you do, the more recognition you'll get, whether it's in a local library or a gallery. The more your work's out there, the more it's recognized. And of course, many of you know that I've written books for artists about just this. My book, Making It in the Art World, which some of you may have, goes into a lot of this in great detail, especially getting recognition. If you've self-exhibited in rented space because you live in the middle of nowhere, does that count as an exhibit? I think it counts as an exhibit. For the Pollock Krasner, I would write to them and ask. If those are the only exhibits you've had, they may want a little bit more than that, but you can ask. I suggest keeping it simple. Yeah, direct in its purpose, as Studio Butler is saying. Easy for the jury to read, as they will receive several, and of course back it up with your best work and reliable references. Yes, that is exactly what I would suggest. Studio Butler 1, that is exactly what I would suggest. Keeping it simple and direct is everything. I think it's everything in communication, right? In presentations, in writing books, in everything really. Writing letters, writing emails, proposals. Everything about that should be simple and direct. The longer something needs, to be described, we begin to lose interest. That's just human nature, especially now with everybody scrolling through everything, right? So yeah, absolutely, Studio Butler, right on. That's exactly correct. So the grant that I'm talking about is the Pollock Krasner Grant, everyone. And again, pkf.org is where you see that. If you want to see my whole grant list, it's right here. I just put it in the comments there. Okay. Oh, great! You have my book. Glad you love it. I'm going to get to the other questions here. Does the PKF having an affinity with Pollock's work, is that a factor? No, it's not at all a factor. Does the PKF request to know what you spent the grant on if you win? No, you've already told them what you spent the grant on. They'd like you to give them credit, but they don't ask for a breakdown after that. Let's see. Great book. Thanks so much. What counts as an exhibition record? Yeah, it could be any public space, potentially. They're also looking for galleries as well. Do they favor people whose work will benefit the community? No, in this grant, they don't favor that. Some grants do. The Awesome Foundation, which is listed in my resources, does appreciate that and favor that, but not the Pollock Krasner Grant. Any advice for a Canadian artist wanting to be an American? You can apply from there, if that's what you mean. Cole, you can apply. Can I apply to have the work photographed and also to get you that would be nice, but you'd need to have the work first, or to get a year on Praxis Center, an individual consultation with experts like me. And Jane's asking, this wouldn't be the grant for that, because you need to have the work photographed in order to show them. So you can't ask for a grant to get the work photographed without the work being photographed. You could ask for more work to be photographed. Yeah, that's that. But yeah, you would need the work photographed first. And let's see, can the proposal be a multimedia show event? This isn't about a proposal, and multimedia would likely not be appropriate for the Pollock Krasner. They're looking for sculptors, again, as they say, and I'm reading from their guidelines. They're looking for applications from visual artists who are painters, sculptors, and artists who work on paper, including printmakers. That could be presented in some kind of immersive way, but a multimedia event would be outside that. Okay. Hi, Ryan. Nice to see you here. We've been talking about the Pollock Krasner Grant. And if anybody has any questions, Ryan or anybody else, please ask. Let's see. I've been able to exhibit in Paris and France since I live in Turkey. I'm paying fees, and sending frames is way too much money for me. Yeah, you in general, I mean, this is slightly off topic, but don't pay fees for shows. Don't apply to shows that ask for money, and then you have to pay for shipping and everything. You know, I'm sorry to say, but those shows are a waste of time. And the reason they're a waste of time is because all these kind of galleries that are asking for money for you to be in their show, asking for you to ship the work, asking for fees, they're not making money off selling work. They have no incentive to sell work. They're making money off those fees. The way galleries work is on a consignment basis, essentially. You loan them your work with a contract, ideally, and they take 50% of the sale price. I think that's more than enough, exhibits in restaurants, well, you can put that on your resume. That would be taken into consideration. But again, galleries are important for this grant. Does it matter how many followers it has on social media? No, that wouldn't matter at all for this grant. Let's see. My time would not be something to add to the cost. Is there an average amount artists requested, or are grant amounts already determined? No, there are average amounts. Well, there's a range. You can ask for up to $50,000. The average range of gifts of grants is between $5,000 and $30,000. And that's about all. So I don't see any more questions unless someone has any questions. But I just want to thank you guys. I want to thank you guys for making art and being who you are, and for attending this, and for wanting grants, because typically grants are not applied for. Artists tend to feel that it's too competitive or something else, but in fact, there's plenty of money out there, more than ever. And so before I go, I just want to ask, would you guys want to see a talk like this on other Fridays about other specific grants? Is that something that interests you? And yes to all your questions when I post this. And you're welcome. Yeah, I guess that's all. Okay. Well, very good. I will do more. And glad to see all of you again. Thanks for all your warmth and kindness and attention here today. I appreciate all of you guys. And if you have any questions, you can always ask on the post of this on the Instagram account. Although this is also going to YouTube at the same time. So good to see you all. Good to see everybody here that are familiar tags as well as those who aren't, familiar names. Great to see all of you guys. So have a great evening or day wherever you are in the world. Take care, everyone. Thanks for your really good questions, too. Let's see. Take care, everyone.